Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. Today we're going to be taking a look at walking through the lens mod for the Sionyx Aurora line of sport cams. So let's get to it. The very first step in doing this mod is really to cover up the lens. And this is an optional step, of course, but I like to put a little bit of painter's tape, making sure that the painter's tape is in fact clean, over the lens mod, over the lens cap of the OEM lens so that you don't scratch anything. We're not really going to be doing too much with this side of the lens, but we just want to make sure that if we were to stand it up on something that we don't actually scratch it. So we don't want to damage our camera, right? So just make sure to protect your lens if that's something that you're concerned about. Alright, so the first step in the mod is to actually get access to the internal parts so we can start disassembling this bad boy. So what I'm going to do is take a common razor blade. You can use any kind of other prying tool, but a razor blade is really thin, and what you're going to do is pry off this cap right here. So a lot of people don't know that this comes off quite easily, but usually you can get it with your fingernails. Quite easily, like I can get them on my fingernails from that side. So that's going to come off, and you can set that aside. Make sure you're keeping track of your parts here, because as you know, we all know this is kind of an expensive camera, so you don't want to be losing parts. And there you go. So this is the let me see if I can get the light in there. So this is where we're going to be unscrewing some parts here. And this little cover here, this one's a little bit more covert. This one's also a cover as well. Now this one, if the first time you're doing this, you might find that it's a little difficult to get off because there is some double-sided tape right there. So there is the second screw cover. So let's go ahead and get rid of that razor blade and start unscrewing some parts. So on this side there are 3 screws. There is a screw here in the corner. There's one right there as well, and there's also a screw right here, if we can focus. That screw holds in a small bracket, which I can show you once it's out. It's a little easier to see once it's already taken out, so let me go ahead and do that from this side. Just a small Phillips head screwdriver, precision screwdriver set will work just fine for this. And just to make sure that you don't drop the screw off the tip of the screwdriver, a small set of tweezers is also quite handy to have. So screw number 1 comes out into the parts tray, and then also you kind of got to wiggle this a little bit because it's a spring under tension, but when that comes directly out. There's a couple little pins holding it in there, but that's the part. Let's see if we can get it to focus. That's just the selector switch that helps once you turn this rotating ring here to select the scene. That's all it does. So that's what is moving on the inside of the camera, is that little spring thing. So let's go ahead and take out the rest of the screws here. Alright, screw number 1. Alright, and then for this other side here, there's only 2 small silver screws on this side. You can easily remember it if you were to put this back together, that the silver cover covers the silver screws. So let's go ahead and remove those as well. The other one here. Alright, once we've got all the screws taken out, this is where the lens and the sensor module will separate from the rest of the camera body. So you can already see it coming apart there. This is where things get a little scary, so don't worry, you're not going to break anything if you do this correctly and you be very careful. But now we have the internal guts of the camera open. So what we're going to need to do is separate the lens and the sensor module from the rest of the camera body. That's pretty easy to do once we take a look at down in there and see what's going on. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so looking closely at the body of the camera, we're going to need to do 2 things on this side. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is peel back this black covering here. Now this isn't damaging anything. It's just a way to protect some of the electronics so that they don't get damaged when they're in the factory, right? So sorry if this is a little blurry. It's kind of hard to show. And what we're going to need to do is unplug these red and green wires from the circuit board here. Now it's pretty easy to do. You just grab it with a pair of tweezers, just like this. And there's no locking mechanism holding it in there. It's just kind of firmly in there. So once you get that out, there you go. You can just let that dangle pretty easy, right? So now we can cover that back up. No need to do anything further. Now, The second thing we need to do on this side is remove this smaller ribbon cable from its connection on the circuit board right there. Now this is the tricky one here. Really the hardest part's getting it back. It's not really that hard getting it out. So what we're going to do is there's a little door right here. I don't know if you can see my tweezers on it or not. That little door right there has got to come open. So we will lift it up, lift it vertically, and the cable just comes right out. It's just laying right there. Pretty easy. So that's how you disconnect all of the connections on this on the camera body side of the housing. I'm going to go ahead and start peeling some of this black tape away. Now this black tape stuff is quite sticky, so you might want to be careful with it. You can save it if you wish. I'm going to save it just because, you know, why not? Now this copper tape here you don't need to necessarily worry about just yet, but we're going to go ahead and start peeling away some of this other stuff. Once you get it started with the tweezers, you're really going to need your fingers to kind of get in there and very carefully remove this piece here. I think I can just leave that, yeah. So we've noticed the tape changes a little bit from each variation of Sionyx Aurora. So now here you have the end connection for this ribbon cable here. This ribbon cable will just slide out. Now on mine, it's pretty easy. You just pull very, very gently, and it pops right out, just like so. And it's even easier if you just wanted to test just to make sure that it goes back in. There you go, slides right back in, no problem whatsoever. So now you've got two separate halves. You've got your lens and sensor body, and then you have the camera body. Now this part we don't need anymore, so we can bring that off to the side here. And this is what we're going to start disassembling this part so that we could take that lens off. So let's go ahead and move into that. Alright, so on this side we have a lot of tape removing to do because there are 4 screws that we need to get access to. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put this piece of tape back because I don't need it. And we're going to start removing some of this black tape and as well as some of this shielding tape. So this copper tape here is really just for shielding, just to make sure that none of the electronic components get damaged with one another and things like that. But we're going to have to peel it back, being very gentle, to make sure that we don't damage it. But it doesn't really serve a purpose other than just protecting things. It's not an electrical component here. So let's go ahead and get some of this black tape off. One here. There's a screw way down in there. You probably can't see it, maybe just a little bit on camera there. Okay, let's go ahead and see if we can get the other one. Well, we might as well just pull that all the way off. Yeah, that'll do. Gotta get rid of some of this copper tape here. And you really make sure that you don't modify these things or try to make it hard for you to do it. So, got a lot of clear tape that you might not be able to see on camera. There's a lot of clear tape as well that's kind of holding all this stuff together, but that's not necessary. So just gonna peel this off as best we can. This is kind of the tedious part, trying to make sure that you don't mess anything up, but it's also difficult to get a lot of this tape off. Okay, got one of those pieces of copper shielding tape out of the way, which was covering this other hole over here. There we go. There's that one. So we continue this all the way around, and alright, so once you got the tape off, you can start unscrewing these 4 screws. I had to get a smaller screwdriver that was actually fit down in the bottom. So these screws are torqued in there pretty good, as you might find most of the screws are on this bad boy. Alright, so once you got the screws undone, you can start preparing and making sure that you're ready to separate. So you can go ahead and remove some of this tape that is, again, holding kind of everything together. You can remove that. Let's see if I can make sure if I can get that off. There we go. So now this ribbon cable can move freely without being yanked out. It would not be good to yank out random cables, right? So there we go on that. Just taking time, making sure we've got all this, all the connections undone. Alright, so now we've gotten kind of the tape cleared out of the way, we can kind of see the gap forming there. What you need to do is resist the urge to pull on this, because this is not going to separate right here. There's actually a little bit of a trick. So there's one more part that if you were to try to take this apart from here and you don't remove this part, well, first of all, it's not going to happen, and if you try to force it, you're going to break it. So what you need to do is you will look on this ring here, on the focus ring, right? Or it's really not a focus ring, but it's to set the aperture, right? So this ring here, if you will look at one of these little nodules here, you will notice that one of them is not like the other. This is a little trap door, and you can pop that off quite easily to making sure to not lose it. And underneath here is a pin. This pin is connected to the lens on the inside of this. So if you don't remove this pin, you're going to destroy your device. So making sure to be very, very careful. You can use a pair of tweezers. I've found that a flathead works quite well. Just grab the edge of it. It's a smooth pin. There's nowhere to grab on it, unfortunately. You might have to move the focus rod, not the focus ring, move the ring around a little bit to grab it, but it should come free I say quite easily, and then it's difficult. There we go. All right, so now that it's out a little bit, I can use my tweezers to grab it and pull it the rest of the way. So there is that pin. So that goes into the parts tray off to the side, and now you can pull this apart. But wait, there's more. This little ribbon cable here is going to come loose, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. I'll show you how it goes back together if you wanted to put it back together. But you go ahead and separate. I'll do it this way so that you can see where that ribbon cable goes. And as you can see, that ribbon cable comes out just like that. You can see how it fell out of position there. So if you wanted to put this back, it's pretty easy. You can see that it's slightly curved, and in the curve, of course, follows the shape of the lens, and you bring it all the way back in there, set it in its little tray. There's a little tray for it to go into, coax it in there, and then you can put it back to normal. So no problem there on that front. But we're gonna, since we're doing the lens mod, we're gonna pull this out. Here's your lens cage that protects the lens, and there's your ribbon cable, and there's your lens. As you can see, it is a Computar, 16 millimeter, 1 and 1.4 aperture. So makes sense, right? So there is your lens. There is your C-mount lens. You can now focus the aperture and all that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and break this down a little bit further, and we'll see how we can change this to a interchangeable type of lens. Alright, so once you get to this step, you're almost done, but we still have one final challenge. So if you pull off this copper tape, sorry I already did it because it came off earlier, you will see, if I can zoom in here just a tad without it going out of focus on us. Sorry if that's a little blurry. The focus on this camera is not that great. You'll see really the biggest challenge yet. So this right here is obviously the lens. This silver part is also part of the lens. So these little gray spots right here, these are cutouts in the black housing here. Now what needs to happen is this silver ring here and the rest of the lens needs to unscrew and come off. That's the C-mount that's underneath this. However, Sionyx have epoxied this screw-in, threaded-in part right there. Alright, so what you can do is use a razor blade, or I prefer, because it's quite a bit safer, to use some kind of pick device like this. This is obviously not the best one, but it's the only one I had on hand, and you can start scratching away at that epoxy to get rid of it and dig it out of there. And this is going to be the chore. This is the hardest part of the whole thing. I know this isn't exactly a beginner-friendly mod, but once you get this done, that's pretty much the final step before reassembly. So let's go ahead and scratch away all of that epoxy, and we'll be back in just a second. Alright, so once you use your little hook tool or whatever you have on hand to dig out all of that epoxy, you are done. It's not too bad. I overstate how difficult it is. It's really not too bad to get in there and dig that epoxy out. It's pretty shallow. It doesn't go all the way through, so it's really easy to do. I only stabbed myself like 37 times while doing it, so it's not too bad. But once you get to a point to where it's free, you will notice that that silver ring now is unlocked, and you can unscrew the entire lens. So there you go. Now you have a C-mount lens that you can use for something else if you're into that sort of thing. And so there you go, and we are done. Now all we have to do is reassemble all of this stuff, which is a challenge in and of itself, but we are now ready for reassembly. Alright, so before we go ahead and begin the reassembly process, there's one more thing that we have to do. That our lens mount is done, but now we have to modify this housing so that we can still use a bit of it. So you can pull off this tape, it doesn't really matter. We're not going to be needing that anymore, but we still have 3 screws, only 3 screws left to go, so we go ahead and unscrew these and put that screw aside. And now, once we have these 3 screws out, it's pretty simple. So there we go. Now we have this piece right here, which is going to be our help us reassemble it, and this lens sort of shroud we don't need anymore, so we could store that away just in case we wanted to revert back to the original mod. So take the mod away and go back to the original camera. So we're going to need this for reassembly. So let's go ahead and start putting everything back together. So essentially we're just going to put everything back together again in reverse order. So alright, now that we've got this nice and screwed back down into place, we can start putting things back into where they go. So I'm going to go ahead and thread in this light bar from this side, just cause why not. You'll need some kind of adhesive or something to keep it stuck there, because obviously we don't have the reverse side of a lens housing to keep it in place. So once we get that going, that'll be fine. But this is going to be the last part we connect up anyway. So for now, I'm just going to pull it out and not worry about it. Alright, so moving back to the camera housing itself, the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we have it oriented the correct way. In this case, we do. So now we're going to connect up our larger ribbon cable, making sure to do this very properly and making sure that everything is lined up just so. We don't want it off center or anything. That would not be good. Alright, so now that we have that pushed back in there, we can put in our light bar. So we're going to thread that through. Give that a little bit of a slack. And the hard part is connecting this one back up. Honestly, it's quite difficult to do, to be honest. But we can give it a shot. You might need an extra helping hand from someone else. But it just lays right back in there where it came from. If we can do this. It's a lot easier when you don't have to film it, when you're not trying to record this. Alright, once you finally get it in there, and you can close that little door on top of it, there you go on that. That works. That's usually the most frustrating part. And then now we can peel back this black tape once again. Grab our tweezers here and our connector and make sure to plug it back in. Now it can only go one way, so don't worry about putting it in backwards because there we go. Alright, so once we got all of our connections made, we can gently push this back together. Let's go ahead and grab our black screws first. Put one of them in here. Now I'm just going to lightly, I'm not going to quite torque it down. Anytime you're trying to do something that's, round or even square in shape like this kind of is, you always want to make sure that you do it in a crisscross pattern. Make sure you get the even torque all the way around. And let's do our silver screws. There we go on that. Go. And now I can go ahead and torque this down pretty good. Make sure to close the gap. So do that one, and the one opposite from it, and then the one over here, and then back over here, just like changing a tire, right? Pretty easy. So there we go. Alright, so before we call it quits and declare victory on this, there's one final step, and that final step has to do with this LED strip here. Now this is a very important step, and you might find that it's not going to be a particularly effective camera unless you do actually do this final step. This LED light strip here, it's not really for visual LEDs. What it is a series of LEDs and sensors here. I don't know if you can see that or not, here and here. And what it does is it detects the light between these two sensors, and it determines what time of day it is, or the proper aperture setting for the camera. Or really technically not the aperture setting, because you do that manually. It really has to do with how the sensor detects light. So what you need to do is to trick the camera into thinking that it's nighttime all the time, because obviously this piece of hardware is now exposed, and you want to make sure that it can actually function in the dark instead of being stuck in daytime mode, which is exactly what's going to happen if you were to just stop right now. You'll find that your fancy new night vision camera doesn't actually work in the dark anymore. So what you need to do is very simple, and you can take a piece of electrical tape and just cover up one of these sensors. That prevents the light from going back and forth and tricks the camera into thinking, it's nighttime. So obviously you're not going to be able to switch back and forth between nighttime, twilight, and daytime with this mod, but this will allow the infrared filter to be lifted away from the actual sensor, and you can actually see infrared light this way. So that's really the most important step when it comes to this part. So let's go ahead and cover up one of these sensors. It doesn't really matter which one. I'm just going to pick this one right here. Now you could have, if you had wanted to do this beforehand, you could have just done this and then stuck it back down inside the casing before you screwed it shut. But you can do it from this side as well. You just need a little bit of work, but it will fit back down inside there pretty easily. But it's just really hard to film. So once you get that sensor tucked down and back down into where it came from, or you could even just leave it on top and just tape over it. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. You'll see how it works if you were to try to do this mod. It's really the easy part. What you could do then is go ahead and pop back on your normal lens and just verify that the whole thing works again, making sure to put the battery back in and everything like that. But yeah, there you go. There's the mod. There's the full version of it. You have your aperture control right here, pretty easy. It's manually controlled, and you have your focus ring right here. So it works just like a normal camera now. And if you were so inclined, you could swap out this rather small, normal, standard little C-mount lens for something just a tad bit bigger. You could go with something a little bit larger than this. Of course, that's going to increase your weight. You got to be very careful when it comes to these C-mount options, because of the threads are quite fine. But there we go, threading the camera onto the lens rather than the other way around. But there you go. Now you can have a larger setup that actually works from quite a distance away, as you can see here. This is a very good surveillance setup if that's what you're going for. So very handy, very good mod to do if you're interested in stuff like that. And then also you can swap it out for other kinds of filters and lenses as well.